you've been very clear. You've talked about the missional mandate that God has for the Jew.
Yes.
All right. You've also been very clear to us that we have at least a similar evangelistic mandate to the rest of the Gentile church, that the calling upon the Jew does not absolve us from our calling to spread the gospel as well. You've been very clear about that. So if Jewish people are called to be God's messengers to the world, why is it so difficult for Jewish people to receive and act on the message? And then as a follow-up, how are we supposed to approach evangelism to a Jew? And is that any different from any other people group?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of good questions there. If I had 8 hours, I'd give you a whole seminar on how to bring
You
the
don't.
gospel. Let me say this much, first of all. We Jews are among many different cultures that you could call gospel-resistant cultures. We're not the only ones who are gospel-resistant. Mormons are a gospel-resistant culture. Jehovah's Witnesses are a gospel-resistant culture. Atheistic scientists are a gospel-resistant culture. There are a lot of gospel-resistant cultures. There are certain factors that contribute to our gospel resistance as Jews. One of them is what you could call the disgrace of history. We Jews don't know the gospel, but we know what's been done to us in the name of Christ. Not in agreement with anything that Christ ever taught, but we don't know that. We Jews don't know the gospel, but we know the Crusades. And we know the pogroms in Eastern Europe. And we know the Inquisition. And we know the ultimatums that we were given: be baptized or burned. So we were baptized and then we were burned anyway. We know the blood libels, where even as recently as the last century in Europe, Jewish people were accused of kidnapping Christian children, murdering them, and using their blood to make Passover matzah. We know about this. That's what we understand to be the gospel, because no one's told us the gospel. So that makes it especially challenging to bring the gospel to many people. That makes it especially challenging for us to drop the resistance. Another factor that contributes to our resistance is what you might call the betrayal of God, as far as we're concerned. I came to faith in 1977. I was 25 years old. I remember having a conversation with my father early on. He was very pained, he was very hurt because of what he thought the gospel was. So he just stood there, listened, as I tried to tell him about the Lord. And when I finished, the only thing he said to me was, "I'm really not interested in God because I know he's not interested in me." Where's that coming from? That's coming from 1939 to 1945. That's where that's coming from. If there's a God, where was he when we really needed him? So there's a sense of betrayal that makes it difficult, maybe especially difficult. But I think for many, the strongest factor that makes us especially gospel resistant is what I call the cost. Now, don't misunderstand me. You can't buy salvation, you can't earn salvation, you can't pay a price in money and or good deeds and get saved. But there is a cost There's a cost. You paid a cost. If you're already a believer in Jesus, whether you have thought it through or not, you paid a price when you came to Christ. You really did. We all do. We Jews are very much aware. It's up front in our thinking. I'll tell you a story. Some years ago, I was talking to a young rabbi. He gave me all of his theological arguments for why Jesus might be the Christ of the nations, but he can't possibly be the Messiah of us Jews. Give me all of his theological arguments. And when he was done, I said, you know, Rabbi, you don't have to like me, but don't insult my intelligence. We both know that those aren't your real reasons. He said, yes, they are. I said, no, they're not. I said, I know your real reasons. We're the same age, we're the same culture. I know your real reason. And then I said, let me ask you a question, but you don't even have to answer it. I said, if you were to look at the scriptures, the Hebrew scriptures, with an open mind, and if you were to come to the conclusion, the crazy conclusion on your own, on the basis of the Hebrew scriptures, that Yeshua is the promised Messiah according to Moses and the prophets, and if you openly believed that, what would you lose? You'd lose your wife. You'd lose your children. You'd lose your job. You would lose the respect and friendship of everyone who knows you. I said, the only people who would stand with you are the crazy Jews for Jesus, like me. I said, that's the issue, isn't it? You can't afford to look at this with an open mind. It's just too costly, isn't it? And you know what he said? He said nothing because he was a man of integrity. He couldn't admit that I was telling him the truth, but he wasn't going to acknowledge that. He wasn't going to lie and say no. So he said nothing. I'd like to believe that a man with that kind of integrity can ultimately come to faith. Now, should you therefore be discouraged by these challenges from sharing the gospel? No. Boy, if we had to, I would tell you, of all the Holocaust survivors I've had the privilege of knowing who came to faith in Jesus. Some of these people I studied with. Anti-gospel resistance can be broken down through our prayer, through our proclamation, and through the power of the Holy Spirit. That's how it works. So don't let that discourage you. There are probably more Jewish people who are believers in Jesus today than there have been any other time in history since the first century. We don't have the YouTube videos from the first century, so we don't know that for sure. But we have good reason to think that there may be more Jewish believers in Jesus today than there have been in the last 20 centuries. That's pretty exciting. So don't let gospel resistance stop you.
So perseverance and prayer.
Couldn't hurt.